In this video, I'll be creating a diorama of the iconic standoff between Gandalf the Grey and the Balrog from Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. If you haven't heard of it, you're a degenerate. Long time no see, everybody. How are yous? Before getting into this video, I think I owe everyone a quick explanation on the radio silence of this channel. It was a hobby and a passion, which I intended to evolve, but I guess it just never did. With the juggle of freelance and overall life, investing time into creating videos and continuing to find my creative niche became just non-viable. I experienced imposter syndrome for the first time in my creative career and lost pretty much all my motivation. I would do like these circles in my head about what content to make, but not only that, also the style, the frequency, monetization and community, that it was just driving me crazy. So I made a choice to pivot and try something new, which is exactly this. I've started a new venture alongside one of my best mates of 10 plus years, Riley, and we're gonna be building monthly dioramas over there on that channel. So I can leave the link in the description. Haven't done a plug in a while. First things first, I needed to print the characters purchasing STLs from a website named Colts 3D, actually fantastic website. And then I began to start shaving and slicing the resin. I glued the parts together and then putting them aside to be painted for later. You see, when you attempt anything new, encountering hurdles is inevitable. Integrating electronics into this diorama resulted in quite the challenge. However, I think in the end, it made all the difference. So I started by asking for advice from my local electronics store. They told me what to buy and provided a circuit diagram on a piece of paper. I took it in high hopes, despite it looking what I would probably describe as extraterrestrial. I short-circuited some LEDs, trying to follow this diagram. But I also learned about voltage, current, and resistance, which is otherwise known as Ohm's law. And Ohm, my God, is it boring? So let's not venture into any technicalities. All you need to know is that I aimed to power 2 orange, 1 red, and 1 blue LED for the eyes and mouth of the Balrog, as well as Gandalf's staff. I also had 2 LED filaments, which are like these LED wires, and their purpose was to illuminate the raging fire, which would soon dissipate from the whip and hair of the Balrog. I mean, he doesn't have hair, but I'm just gonna call it hair for the sake of this video. I soon realized that the size of these LEDs were too large to fit within the skull, so a smaller alternative was required, such as these micro SMD LEDs. SMD standing for surface mount display, not suck my... I had no idea LEDs could get this small. Like, I swear to God, they were fucking tiny. I didn't know how small they were gonna be until I received them, and I was kind of regretting the size that I bought because as to solder and strip them was such a meticulous task. Nonetheless, when they worked, they were bright, making them more than suitable for the job. Now, in the off chance I needed to access these tiny LEDs for later, I made the decision to magnetize the head to the body of the Balrog. I also wanted to kind of practice magnetization as well, and just for future dioramas. The housing to all of these electronics was to go underneath the base, so to not be seen externally. I drilled a hole through the board, which my wires would feed through, and thought it was a good time now to probably move on to building the landscape, as unbeknown to me, we would be coming back to this section. Grabbing my XPS foam and a Stanley knife, I came to realize why this material is so popular in the use throughout the hobby. It's wildly light. At the same time, it's insanely robust. It had me quickly swapping from Mr. Stanley over here to a respirator mask and a hot wire. These two rivals face off amidst a bridge within Khazad Dûm, later falling into its depths. I wanted to utilize height here to help convey the significance of this battle alongside the sheer scale difference between the two characters. I found 3 blocks of foam was enough. Using foam safe superglue to stick them together, I made sure to line up where the hole from underneath the gesso board, where all the electronics are, would intersect with the top, using another hot wire attachment to puncture through these blocks. So you see, this attachment that I had, despite it being quite long, it wasn't long enough to reach to the bottom, so I kind of had to shove it in there and fish it around, and it ended up resulting in quite a jank puncture, which later down the track, when feeding wires through, made my life so much harder. I checked that everything was aligned using a straw, and I decided to tape my electrical wires to a long, sturdy wooden stick which by the way, I had no intended use for them when I bought them, but I looked at them and I'm like, I'm gonna fucking use those for something. And they came in clutch. It eventually became my most reliable method to do this action, which I ended up having to do a lot because shit broke off. And anyways, it was time to glue the bridge on and bring out the scalpel to start creating details in the rock face. I built up a rough wall of rocks using some XPS scraps with the idea to have the distance in between Gandalf and the Balrog to be the sheerest and deepest part of the gap. I had to drill holes into the feet of the Balrog so that I could shove some supports inside. I found this quite ironic considering how bulbous his quadriceps are. Regardless, I ended up breaking his limbs off camera, which had me gluing and taping him up in desperation. During this process, I noticed some gaps in the Balrog where his arms and legs connected to his torso. I figured this had a high probability of pissing me off if I was to ignore it, so I saw it as a good opportunity to practice some sculpting. After all, I did end up buying this tool for this exact practice, and considering the cost of art supplies, it would have been extremely rude not to. Filling the gaps, I deemed it good enough and moved towards positioning him onto the diorama. My hot pole, I guess I'll call it that, aided in melting the holes for the supports, and the scalpel helped carve out a section for the tail. For some reason, the tail dropped lower than the feet, so despite elevating the Balrog on some rocks, it still needed some breathing room. Having the head fit comfortably was a relief, I can tell you that, as many wires were running out from underneath. I lined them along the spine indentation, using some tape to hold them in place, followed by some more green stuff to act as a protruding ridge. So instead of his back going inwards, it was going outwards, and I think I did a pretty good job with it. You can't see any wires. I think that part was pretty fucking epic. We were considering putting the wires through the Balrog, like literally through his body, but that probably would have caused me more headaches. I'd love to learn more about sculpting and anatomy, even electrical, metal, and woodwork. I think they all overlap greatly with the diorama hobby and seem like great skills to have. Something else I would have loved to know was which adhesive was best to hold the resin together. I tried super glue, I tried hot glue, even epoxy glue, but either they weren't strong enough or took too long to dry. I think I'm gonna try UV epoxy adhesive for my next build. I've seen them online, and I'm pretty sure this is how it works. You put it there and then shine UV light on it and it instantly cures. Something like that would have been perfect. Hiding the wires for Gandalf's staff wasn't too difficult. The idea was to have the micro LED placed atop his magical stick, the wires spiraling down it, entering through and lying underneath the bridge. I was sweating from my nutsack at this point. The micro LED solder had disconnected a few times already, and stripping them, soldering them back to be stronger proved to be the most challenging aspect of this build. XPS foam scraps allowed me to cover up the work, and we continued working towards finishing the base. So I bought this hot knife without originally knowing its intended use. It appeared to be best for wood burning activities. What the inventors might have not considered was how efficient it would be in melting and sculpting foam. The radiating heat was so strong that holding the knife a small distance from the foam created perfect divots and cracks that you would assume lie in the rock face of Khazad-dûm. Then came a part I was genuinely so excited for, a step that is so pivotal in all diorama builds, the application of what is called Sculpt-A-Mold. Mixing it with some water, I applied this gooey white coagulate around all the areas I wanted to build up landmass and better unite plaster rock I had made off camera. It also did a great job at concealing any large obnoxious cracks between blocks of foam. So I found the best way to do this was in small batches, as it dried rather fast, and I used a trusty pottery tool to aid in reaching any areas my fingers could not. This stage can get rather messy, so I made sure to clean up my trusty workbench for the coming stages, plugging all the holes, covering all the LEDs, and sucking up any rocks that just refused to glue down. Trust me, they would have had a better life on the diorama. Oh, and would you look at that? It's prime time, baby. Grey provided a pleasant base coat layer, making sure to give it a couple of coats, obviously, just to be thorough. Remember this part? Well, yeah. I began to question my life choices as I had already fixed the Balrog onto the diorama. Painting him was now going to be extremely difficult. Troubleshooting this, however, not a problem. Introducing aluminium foil, or aluminum, depending on which degenerate part of the world you're from. Speaking of degeneracy, one word: airbrushes. The Balrog's bodily form is somewhat up for contention. The alignment between Tolkien's description and the film isn't exact, and fan art differs quite significantly. So in my instance, I ended up opting for the Balrog that accidentally ordered 10 times the amount of testosterone and said, fuck it. So the airbrush allowed me to apply a nice base coat ranging between fiery oranges and these like devilish browns, and then following with a dark wash to provide the Balrog with depth and dimension. At least that's what I thought, darkening the recesses, yeah. But I found it ended up just drawing symbolism from my toilet bowl after a double quarter pounder and a McHappy meal, clearly endorsed by this fly. Dry brushing the tips and edges, thank God, ended up bringing him back to life, making now a good time to line the LED filament along the whip. This was a very exciting part actually, I'd been wanting to do this for ages. Inverting the aluminium protection, I turbo blasted the terrain with some dark blue wash, and with needed time to dry, I ended up flipping the gesso board over onto its side. Remember how I said we would come back to this section? Yeah, well, this was the situation. The 4 micro LEDs were powered by a not so ideal 6-volt battery pack. This connected to a DC female converter that had the positive and negative wires inserted like an absolute champ. So to avoid things getting confusing, I ended up deciding to use another battery pack, which was going to power the 2 LED filaments alone. And I was able to connect an external switch to this, which I thought was pretty fucking cool, but it did raise a couple of issues here. First of all, the micro LEDs weren't actually getting enough power. We weren't unlocking their full potential. And secondly, if I was to not add another switch, I would have to lift the diorama each time I wanted to turn off and on the lights, which is obviously AIDS. The solution was actually quite simple. I bought a 15-volt battery pack, soldered on a switch, and tested the circuit before installing it. Flicking those switches and watching them LEDs light up just never felt better. At least, that's what your mum said.
Is that the end?
No.
Oh, that would be the perfect way to end it, bro. That would be.
It was really all about the details now. Dry brushing the terrain, installing the second filament, and painting Gandalf. I wanted plumes of smoke and fire to surround this powerful demonic monster, so I opted for pillow stuffing to signify this. I do regret not looking into what is the best stuffing or material alike to refract and interact with light, because I found the end result, you can kind of just see the LED filament straight through the stuffing as opposed to it lighting up the entire hair. But you live and you learn. I was airbrushing them in this color palette that I felt like made them look almost edible. Deciding against this intrusive thought, they were ready for application and trimming. Painting the wings was fun. I mean, really fun. Like, so much fun, to the point where after I glued them on, in the most jank way possible, mind you, I had a bit of mess to clean up. And rightfully so, as after months of vitamin D deprivation, lobotomy, consideration, and just enough tears so to not take away my masculinity, I am able to present to you our rendition of J.R.R. Tolkien's Gandalf versus the Balrog.